in Exodus chapter 3 through chapter 4, verse 17. That is where we are today. And if there is a part of Exodus that we are familiar with, this is part of it with the God's calling of Moses from the burning bush. So that's where we'll be this morning here in Exodus chapter 3. If you don't know, recently I volunteered to do coaching for Hollandale for their 7th and 8th grade because there's a tournament, a basketball tournament that they do with 3 other Christian schools, all in northern Iowa. So it's just a day thing, but they get together and they play basketball. They've done a soccer one, and then a volleyball one, and now this quarter it's basketball, and then last quarter it's softball. So they needed somebody to help with basketball, and the kids said, "Dad, you should do it." And I'm like, I don't know if I really want to do this. You see, while there was a time in my life when basketball was my life, like it was what I lived and breathed. I was telling Jenny, from junior high all the way through college, I was playing basketball almost every chance I got. Like, it's just what I did. It's what I loved. It's still my first love when it comes to sports. I love basketball. But the reality is, it's been 30 years since I used up my college eligibility in 1996. It's been 27 years since my one coaching experience that I did when I lived down in Russellville, Arkansas. I coached the Boys and Girls with the Boys and Girls Club my 1 year down in Russellville, and then it's been like 20 years since I even played a pickup game of basketball. So from something that used to be my life, it's just not a big part of my life anymore. And I wasn't feeling like, man, I can go and do this. But the kids said, "Oh, Dad, you should do it." And so since they were looking for someone, I said, "Okay, I'll do it." Right? With all these feelings of inadequacies, like even though this is what I did, even though I had this background and experience, I wasn't confident, and still not quite confident in my abilities to do that. And as I was reflecting this week on this calling of Moses, and as we looked at last week, right, Moses was prepared. He had some time with his Israelite family, and then he grew up in Pharaoh's household, which probably means that he learned how to speak, how to make speeches. He learned military tactics. He did all this type of stuff. God had given him this heart of justice, right? We see that in a couple times there in chapter 2, where he goes out and he kills the Egyptian, beating up the Israelite, and then the next day he wants to intervene because one Israelite is mistreating the other, and then when he gets into Midian, he chases off the shepherds who are harassing Jethro's daughters. Like, there's this sense of justice that God implanted into Moses. And then for 40 years, Moses is in the wilderness, learning how to live in the wilderness, learning humility as he tends sheep. So Moses has this kind of, is prepared. God's preparing him for this task, and yet he still is not confident in who he is. For he will name his firstborn son Gershom. I'm a foreigner living in a foreign land. Like, who am I? So Moses had this feeling of inadequacy. And when we come here to the book of Exodus, sometimes what we want to do is we want to look here at Exodus and think Moses is the main character of the story. But he's not. The main character of Exodus is God. And as we noticed last week, even when it seems God is quiet, allowing the mistreatment of his people, God is at work keeping the covenant blessing. That scene and the repeated reminder of, and they were fruitful and multiplied, or they multiplied and they grew in strength. God is blessing them with the covenant blessing. And that is what this series is all about. This is what I want us to remember. God is faithful to his people. No matter what circumstances we may go through, what is happening to us, I am certain that if we look at our lives, we can see blessings. We can discover God at work. So let's just set the scene here as we get it ready into chapters 3 and the first part of chapter 4. Israel, God's people, which was established by God's covenant with Abraham, have been in Egypt for 400 years. Much of that time as slaves. And even then, God blessed them. Yet they cried out for a deliverer. And as we are reading along in Exodus, it seems like, oh, here's the deliverer. It's Moses, right? And Moses comes onto the scene, and he tries to take initiative. So sometimes when it comes to God's calling, it's not always about taking the initiative. It's about waiting for God's timing. Because it seems like Moses takes this initiative and it doesn't go well. He ends up killing this Egyptian, which I think sometimes we want to say, well, that's a justified killing. But God doesn't see it that way. And he's discovered and he has to run away. Otherwise, he's going to be killed. He runs away to Midian, where he meets Jethro and his daughters, and he marries one of the daughters, has a son, has a family. He's tending sheep in Midian for his father-in-law. And now he's at this place called Mount Horeb, or Mount Sinai, two different names for the same place. It's the mountain of God, and God moves into the next phase of delivering Israel out of slavery, and that begins with commissioning Moses as the deliverer. And the first thing Moses needs to know is this: who is God? He's been equipped, he's been prepared, but all of that doesn't really mean anything if he doesn't know who God is. Dr. Carmen Imes says this: knowing who God is changes everything. Knowing who God is changes everything. So let's just jump in here. And I already read chapter 3, so we won't reread that. I'll just hit some of the highlights here. Here we have Moses herding sheep, and he notices a bush that is on fire. And what he really catches his attention isn't necessarily that the bush is on fire, because that might happen. And these bushes in that area have this high oil content, and they would burn up very rapidly. And so what catches his attention is that this bush is not burning up. It's not being consumed. And he finds this amazing, and he goes over to check it out. And there he encounters God. Right? And so not only does God try to gets Moses' attention through this burning bush, but he also then calls out from the bush, Moses, Moses. So anytime you see that double in the Bible, it means it's emphasized. So God gets Moses' attention. Moses, Moses, look over here, come over here. And Moses comes over, here I am, here I am. He comes over there, and God says, hey, no more, don't any closer. Where you are is holy ground. Now, remember, the definition of holiness, or the simple definition that I use, is holiness is separate from the ordinary. Separate from the ordinary. And here you have ordinary ground and ordinary bush. What makes them holy? What makes them separate from the place around them. It's the presence of God. And even here at the start, God is trying to get Moses to understand the reverence, the awe, the importance of what is happening. This is not any ordinary moment. This is a sacred moment. This is a reverent moment. So take off your shoes. If you're going to approach me, take off your shoes. And he calls, and God identifies himself as the God of his father, of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. That's who he is. So up until this point, Moses is dealing with an identity crisis. Like, who am I? He really doesn't know his parents. And remember, in chapter 2, it doesn't give Moses' parents' name, and I think that's by design. We'll learn their names later, but in chapter 2, they're not given. We don't know the name of Pharaoh's daughter. We don't know her husband's name. Like who am I? Moses has to be. Like, I thought I was an Israelite, but maybe not, because they didn't accept me, and the Egyptians threw me out. Like who am I? I'm a foreigner in a foreign land. And so God says, this is who you are. I'm the God of your father, who is a descendant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This is who you are. So understand the moment, understand your identity. And then Moses asks this question. Well, who are you? If you're going to send me to do this, so that's it here too. God says, okay, I have heard what is going on. I've seen it. And now it's time for me to act. I'm going to rescue Israel. And then he says, so I'm sending you, Moses. I'm going to do this, but I'm going to send you. And that's when Moses says, okay, well, who are you? Who are you? If I go do this, who am I going to say sent me? And this is very important, because then God reveals to Moses who he is. He reveals his name. But he doesn't do it right away. He reveals it in 3 parts. First of all, he says, God says in verses 13 and 15 of chapter 3, God also said to Moses, I jumped to the wrong verse. But Moses protested, if I go to the people of Israel and tell them the God of your ancestors has sent me to you, they will ask me, what is his name? Then what should I tell them? And God replied to Moses, I am who I am. Say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent you. God also said to Moses, say this to the people of Israel, Yahweh, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my eternal name, the name to remember for all generations. So God reveals himself to Moses first of all, by saying, I am who I am. And this is debated about the best way to translate this, but we will just go with who I am who I am, or as Dr. Carmen Imes translated it, I will be whoever I will be. And what this means behind this, because there's a lot of discussion about this, but I think the main ideas that we can pull out of what God is saying here is, first of all, he is eternal, he is self-determining, he has active presence, and he's not bound by people's expectations. I will be whoever I will be. I am who I am. You can't change me. I'm not determined by the things around me. I am self-determined. I determine myself. Everything else in this world is determined by who God is. But God determines himself. I will be whoever I will be. I am who I am. I'm not going to change that. And this is so Moses is, I want to back up here just a little bit. Moses' question of, well, who should I say sent me? Because remember, Israel is living in Egypt. Egypt recognizes thousands of gods. Right? And we, as followers of Jesus, believe that while God is supreme, and there's only one creator God, there are a lot of other spiritual beings. And some of those spiritual beings have disobeyed God and have gone their own way and have corrupted this world. And so what we have to understand is that part of these gods that the Egyptians worshiped, they weren't just mythology. They were part of this the evil spiritual being's rejection of God. And it's important, a clarifying point then for Moses to say, well, which God is sending me? Which God is asking me to go? Is it one of these other hundreds of gods of Egypt? Who is sending me? And so God says, well, it's the God of your ancestors. That's who's sending you. I am who I am. And so when God says, I am who I am, he is putting himself above all other gods. So when the Bible says that God is the Almighty One, that's not just a reference to God's omnipotence, right? All powerful. No, it's a reference to he is the God above all gods. He is the Almighty One. Nobody comes close to who God is. He is the creator of all things. So even all these other gods or spiritual beings are determined by who God is. So he says, I am who I am. I will be whoever I will be. And then God says to him, I am has sent you. Tell them, I am has sent you. This is a first person assurance to Moses that he is going on God's mission. Who has sent him? I'm sending you. I am has sent you. You're not making this up. Maybe that first time when you went out there and killed the Egyptian, that was your own initiative. But now I am sending you. I am telling you to go. And then finally, he says, okay, this is the name that you are to give them. You tell them Yahweh has sent me. Now, what my belief here is that Yahweh was the name that God gave to Abraham when he made a covenant with Abraham. And so Israel would have been familiar with the name Yahweh because it's the name of the covenant of the God of the covenant. It's a reminder that God is faithful. The creator God, the Almighty among all the other gods. This is not a new God, but the God of their ancestors. And in chapter 4, verse 1, it shows us that they know God's name. But Moses protested, what if they don't believe me or listen to me? What if they say, Yahweh never appeared to you? Then Yahweh asked him, what is in your hand? So what if their response to me coming is like, no, Yahweh wasn't the one who sent you. Like, that's not possible. And so it reveals that they had an understanding of the name Yahweh. And that's who God is telling Moses is sending him. It's crucial for Moses to know who's calling him. So God is calling to Moses to go do this. But Moses has some objections. So let's look at this. First of all, we need to remember that God has equipped Moses. God has equipped Moses, right? We've talked about this just a little bit ago. He's been raised, he spent time with his Israelite family. He was raised in Pharaoh's household. He spent time in the wilderness. And part of that may have been to learn a little bit more of who God is because he spends time with Jethro, who is a priest And remember, Midian are descendants of Abraham's second wife, and so they can trace their lineage back up to Abraham too. And so they may have an understanding who Yahweh is. And so God has prepared Moses for this. God calls to Moses, I am sending you, but Moses has every excuse on why he is not the right person for the job. Remember, God has protected and equipped Moses for this task. There is no one in the whole entire world more qualified than Moses. But even with all those qualifications, Moses still needs one thing, and that's God's presence. Like all that preparation doesn't mean anything if he doesn't go with God's presence. And we need to remember that too. We can make all the plans, we can have all the right things in order, but if we do not go with God's presence, if we're not going with God, it doesn't matter at all. So Moses' first objection is, who am I? In chapter 3, verse 11. This is what he says. But Moses protested to God, who am I to send to appear before Pharaoh? Who am I to lead the people of Israel out of Egypt? So here we see his inadequacy come full out right in the open, right? Who am I? How am I to do this? And God answered, I will be with you, and this is your sign that I am the one who has sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God at this very mountain. Now, this is one of those funny things. I think it's funny in the Bible. So first of all, God says, well, you're not going alone. I am sending you. Who am I? You're nobody, but because I'm sending you, you are able to do this. And you want a sign that I'm sending you? Now, listen to the sign, right? Your sign will be that I'm with you, is that you're back here when this is all done to worship me here at this spot. Like, that's not very helpful. Like, well, I'd like a sign before I go, and you're giving me a sign after this is all done. But the main point here is God is saying, I am going with you. That's what makes you capable of doing this. Not your abilities, not who you are, but because I am with you. That's his first objection. The second objection is, who are you? And this is the part that we just looked at, chapter 3, verse 13. But Moses protested, if I go to the people of Israel and tell them the God of your ancestors has sent me to you, they will ask me, what is his name? Then what should I tell them? And so as we just talked about, God's revelation of himself is greater than our need for identity. He is the one who is working. I will be whoever I will be. Let them know that I sent you. You don't need anything else because I am there with you. So then objection number 3, what if they don't believe me? In verse 1 of chapter 4. What if they don't believe me or listen to me? What if they say the Lord never appeared to you? So how does God respond to this objection? He says, then the Lord asked him, what is that in your hand? What is that in your hand? Right? He's carrying a shepherd's staff. Well, it's a staff. Okay, throw it down. And when Moses throws it down, what happens to it? It becomes a serpent. Okay, now pick that up by the tail. Now, if you're going to go pick up a serpent, where are you supposed to pick it up at? Behind the head. Because otherwise, it can whip around and bite you. You're not supposed to pick it up by the tail. But that's where God says, hey, pick that thing up by the tail. And he does, and it becomes a staff again. Now, the interesting thing here is the symbol of Pharaoh is the serpent. So when we see pictures of the crown, right, it's the kind of the cobra thing. He identifies as the serpent. So God is challenging Pharaoh's main symbol of the serpent. Then he says, hey, stick your hand into your cloak. And it comes out, and it's diseased. We don't really know what it is because modern-day leprosy is not the same thing as the leprosy we find in the Bible. So that's kind of confusing. So a lot of translations has kind of dropped that idea. But it's some sort of skin disease. It's all white. And then he says, God tells Moses, put it back. And then he takes it back out, and it's whole again. Here, God is showing Moses with this sign, like, I have the power over life and death, over your body. I can heal. I can give disease. Like, I can do this. And then there was the third sign that God gives to Moses. He says, okay, if you give them, the elders of Israel, these first two signs, and they still don't believe you, take some water from the Nile, pour it out on the ground, and it will become blood. Like, here are your signs that I am going with you. And again, with the Nile River, this is hitting right at the Egyptians' belief that the Nile is a god and it's the giver of life. Like, God is setting it up like this. I am attacking, I am confronting the gods of Egypt. So you can trust me. I will go with you. They will believe you because I will give you these signs. I will give you these signs. Then the fourth objection is, I am clumsy-mouthed, verse 10. Now, just even listen how this is translated, how clumsy it is. But Moses pleaded with the Lord, "O Lord, I'm not very good with words. I've never been, and I am not now, even though you have spoken to me. I get tongue-tied, and my words get tangled." So that is deliberately kind of a clumsy sentence. Like, I can't do this. So whether or not Moses had a speech impediment, some people think that's what this is a reference to, or whether this could be the ancient Near East, it's called ritual humility, where Moses is just kind of downplaying his ability. Like, I can't do this. We don't really know for sure, but he's saying, well, I can't speak. I'm not the guy you want to go in front of Pharaoh to say this. And then God's response is, well, who made man's mouth? Who gives people words? Well, I do. Like, God has just shown him, like, I can give you leprosy. I can take it away. I create the whole body. Like, I think I can handle your ability to speak. I can do this. God is the one in control. And then number 5, the objection in verse 13, send someone else. But Moses again pleaded, Lord, please send someone else. So God has answered each one of Moses' objections, and he has given him a response. And Moses finally out says, no, I can't do this. You send someone else. You send someone in my place. I can't do this. And God responds in verse 14. Then the Lord became angry with Moses. This is the first time in the Bible where it says that God became angry. All right, he said, what about your brother Aaron, the Levite? I know he speaks well, and look, he is on the way to meet you now. He will be delighted to see you. And so God says, okay, you don't want to go? I will send Moses with you. Or I will send Aaron with you. And he can do the speaking. Like, you have no excuses left. Like, you can do this. You can do this. God God continues to help Moses, even when he's angry with Moses for not complying. God will go with Moses, and so will Aaron. Moses will not, Moses will not be alone as Israel's deliverer. Moses will not be alone as Israel's deliverer. God will go with him. Aaron will go with him. He will not act alone. So, the question, what does all this have to deal with us? It's cool and all, but what does this have to do with us? Because burning bush moments aren't happening very often. Like, I've been outside a lot. I've done a lot of hiking. I've never had a burning bush moment. I'm guessing that you haven't either. So what does this have to do? Because a direct application isn't happening here. So what does this have to do with us? God called Moses to join him in the task of delivering Israel out of Egypt. And you and I have a similar calling. Matthew chapter 28. You probably know where I'm going. Matthew chapter 28, verses 18 through 20. Jesus came and told his disciples, I have been given all authority in heaven and on earth. Notice, right, just like God reveals himself to Moses, like I am who I am. I'm the Almighty One. Jesus says, I have been given all authority on heaven and on earth. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Teach these new disciples to obey all the commands I have given you. And be sure of this, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. So Jesus commissions his disciples to go and make disciples. And he commissions us because he has the authority on heaven and on earth. That's who he is. He is King Jesus, King of kings, Lord of lords. That's who he is. This is what I want you to do. And then he makes the promise that no matter what, he will be with us even to the very end of the age. That he will not abandon us. He will be with us in this task. And so you and I have been given this task of making disciples. And that's true for everyone who follows Jesus. That's the mission that we're on. It's the way that God saves the world, by calling people into his kingdom. But this doesn't necessarily help us with our specific calling. And so what we need to remember, two thoughts here about making disciples. First of all, it's not something that we do alone. Not something we do alone. It's something that we do together. That's why the Apostle Paul, in a couple different places, uses the body as a metaphor. We are the body of Christ. We are to work, we are to do this together. We cannot make disciples on our own. And on top of that, we have the presence of the Holy Spirit who goes with us. Right? Moses gets a burning bush, and the disciples on the day of Pentecost get flames of fire. God's presence is with us. And then he further equips us with our unique set of talents and skills and experiences. And so if you want to know your part in this job of making disciples, look at where God has equipped you. Look at your talents. Look at your passions. Because all of that can be used to make disciples. And when we come together and we work together and we put these things together, then we're able to make disciples. We're able to be that disciple-making church. And you might still say, hey, Paul, I have nothing to offer. I have no talents. I have no money. I have nothing to offer. And I say, yes, you do. Because the greatest thing that we can do when it comes to making disciples is prayer. It's what God has given to each of us. So if nothing else, when we combine our voices in prayer, God moves. And that's how we work together to make disciples. Like God preparing Moses with lessons in Egypt and lessons with a sheep and with a staff, God is equipping and preparing us as well. We also have to be aware of those places that we are objecting to God's call. So as we evaluate ourselves, we need to look, where am I objecting to God? Like, God, I don't want to go there. I don't want to move here. I don't want to. Where are we objecting to God? Because we need to trust the one who is I am and trust him more than we trust ourselves. So God calls Moses. He doesn't offer Moses to join him. This isn't an invitation. God has prepared and equipped Moses to go, so Moses had a choice: obedience or miss out on God's blessing. Obedience or miss out on God's blessing. Think about the story of Esther. So Esther is in the palace, she's queen, and the plot to kill all the Jews comes. And Mordecai, her cousin, says, hey, you need to intervene on our behalf with the king. And she says, well, I can't because he hasn't called to me. And if I go and see him, he can kill me unless he's invited me, right? And Mordecai responds by saying, how do you know that God hasn't placed you in the palace for just this moment? For just the time as this, however it is, right? And then he goes on to say, and if you refuse, you and your family will be killed, and God will raise up a deliverer or helper for Israel from somewhere else. And I think the same choice was given to Moses. Like God had prepared Moses for that moment, but if Moses said, no, I wouldn't, he would have missed out. He might have been killed, but God would have delivered Israel from some other place. And each one of us faces that same sort of choice. God has equipped us. He has placed us for this task of making disciples. And we can say, no, I don't want to join it. But if we do that, we're going to miss out on God's blessing in our life. But when we step out and join our work together and join our voices in prayer and say, this is what I want to give my life to, we are going to see God at work in mighty and wonderful ways. One of the things from the Free Methodist Church that we are to be thinking about is what they're calling spirit aliveness. I don't necessarily love that phrase, spirit aliveness, but part of spirit aliveness is having this expectation that God is at work. And I think so often when it comes to us as Christians, we put so much emphasis on what we do, what we say, how we can do, the plans that we make, and we forget that behind it all, God is at work. And we need to expect God to show up, God to give wisdom, God to guide. We need to trust the great I am, the God who has delivered Israel out of Egypt, the God who has rescued us from Satan's sin and death. We need to trust in him. So here's our big idea this morning. God reveals himself so his people can trust and obey his call. God reveals himself so his people can trust and obey his call. So as we know God more and more, the easier it becomes to trust in him, to obey what he has called us to do. God has revealed himself to us as love, for God so loved the world. And our call lines up with that, to go and make disciples. Each one of us has a part to play in this task. From teaching to inviting to serving to hospitality to giving to prayer, when we combine our efforts, we become the church that God wants us to be. God loves us, and we are to love people. Our challenge is this week to confess and surrender our objections to God. Where are we objecting? What obstacles are we putting up and saying, God, no, I can't do this. I'm not equipped. I don't have the talent. I'm too afraid, whatever. What of our objections are we giving to God to not follow through with what he has called us to do? So confess your struggle, give it to God, and ask for help. Moses didn't leave Mount Sinai with a blueprint. He didn't leave with confidence in himself. He didn't even leave with all his questions answered, but he left with a promise, I will be with you. The power of the Exodus was never Moses' ability. It was God's presence. The deliverance of Israel didn't rest on a gifted leader, but on a faithful God who is, who was, and who will be exactly who his people need him to be. And the same God who revealed himself in a burning bush has revealed himself to us in Jesus Christ. When Jesus said, go and make disciples, he doesn't say, figure it out. He says, I am with you always. So the question for us is not, am I enough? The question is, do I trust the great I am? God still delivers, God still calls, God still goes with his people, and when we trust who he is, we can obey what he asks, knowing we never go alone.